Dig it. Yeah, I am in Cali, and I am, the joke I make is I wish I had prepared for a pandemic before somebody said prepare for the pandemic. I know you probably didn't even do anything different. You probably had.
I didn't.
That's fucking awesome. Hang on, let me close my office. Hey Dave, I'm starting. Yeah, so guys like you, and I got other friends, ex-mill guys. They're like, that's just another day, man. I had all my shit together, so. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted you on here. And these are short. This is something. It's a and after we get through this, I'll actually have you on the official No Fear podcast and do something longer about your work and your life and what you're doing now with Fieldcraft. But just what I'm doing with this is super short. I've got a bunch of questions that I didn't send you that I'm just going to not put you on the spot, but just ask you. And it's really more about you. And then what can my audience learn from the way you look at the scenario we're in? So for people, I'm going to just jump in here. So my special guest today is Mike Glover, and he runs Fieldcraft Survival. And most of the people who listen to my show are military, law enforcement, emergency services. So they probably know who you are. But if they don't, Mike spent 18 years in the Army, a bunch of other stuff. He's very active on social media. So go check him out. I forward so many of your videos to friends of mine, just weapon handling. And I loved your clearing the house video with the pistol. And I thought that was great. And because I got a lot of friends who don't have your background, and they get guns and they go to the range, but everyone's like, I went shooting today. And I know they're standing there at a range. They're not from concealed. They got their gun out. It's loaded. They're looking at the target. They're going, are you going or I'm going? They're shoot their mag. Like, that's not a gunfight. And I don't need to tell you this, but because how for decades now, everything I do is about the scenario. And when you're designing a scenario, and I don't want this call to be about this, we got to get into it another time, but when you're designing a scenario, it shouldn't be about how you want the scenario to go. It's about thinking how fucking creative the bad guy can be to fuck up your preparation. And that's that Murphy moment. Can you weather the ambush and get back in the fight? Anyways, my little rant there. Mike, welcome to my show.
No, thanks for having me on. It's an honor. Anything with Tony Blauer is an honor. So I appreciate having me on.
So this is a COVID-19 focus. We'll talk for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, whatever it takes. But it's almost like I bump into you in a coffee shop or in a bar, and my first question to you is, dude, how are you? How are you doing with this?
I'm doing really well. Relatively speaking, personally, we at Fieldcraft Survival, all my employees, myself included, we're all prepared for this. I live in rural northern Arizona, so we are just geographically in a good situation anyways. We don't have any highways crossing through. There's no main avenues of approach. You have to literally get off the highway and go out of your way to get to us. So we're kind of shielded in that way. Just the terrain has just set us up for success. Right. So we're doing pretty well in our town. And personally, we were prepared for this early on. Nice. I did a post November of 2019, obviously a month before this thing even took place, about preparation for pandemics. And that led to a lot of thinking about it, but we were always thinking about it. And we're doing fairly well.
Nice. I don't know a lot about you personally, but how's your family doing with this?
They're doing good. My biggest concern, honestly, is my mom. My mom, who's she immigrated here from Korea. She's hard-headed. She's stubborn. She's an entrepreneur, and her business happens to be a salon and spa. So she's constantly right next to people doing their hair, doing their makeup. And she didn't take this seriously. And I've had to constantly get on her about, hey, this is happening. This is very serious.
Right.
Culturally, part of her, she's like displaced from it. but then she started watching the Korean TV about what was going on. And then she took that and was like, okay, this is something I need to pay attention to. But I'm not worried about my immediate family, but the older people in my family, I'm concerned about.
Right. Fair. How has this affected your business?
A little bit. Training wise, I've had to reduce overall numbers in courses. I've also gone out of my way to, like, some places like New Jersey, for example, which is the epicenter next to New York and Connecticut. I won't do training there. I'm not even going to, even with the risk mitigation of having people distanced socially and taking all the precautions. I don't want to exacerbate a crisis, because it is a crisis in New Jersey and New York.
Right.
So our bottom line, we've concentrated a lot of our efforts in content, which is what we always do, but we just doubled down on it.
Right.
And ultimately we'll get through this. But I feel bad for the businesses who are not. So we're doing our best to try to support those businesses locally, especially that aren't doing so well.
Yeah. Like for me, all of my business, if you broke down percentages, we do some stuff online and what have you, but our business is all live training. And then our high gear business, like 80% of that was a result of doing force on force scenarios in our live training. And then the different operators, cops, whoever's in the class would go, wow, this gear is good. And then they would buy the high gear. So like it's like somebody's turning the faucet off. We've had to pivot really, really fast to get stuff online, because we don't really sell anything online, so, and nobody's spending now. So it's interesting how, you've got, have you stood up any online training, any courses? I don't know, you just froze, which isn't good. Are you back now? You froze for a second, but did you hear my last thing? Did my audio cut out?
No, it cut off.
Okay.
Let me see my network real quick. Make sure I'm on the right network. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let's. We had some technical difficulties there. We're right in the moment of a deep, passionate thought. So jumping back in here, you guys are doing good. Are you still teaching some live courses?
So I've done. We will be teaching live in South Carolina at the end of the month. We also will be teaching, what's the other one? Texas, because of the range facilities and how spread out they are. We just reduced the number of packs. But one thing that I did do is I've taught webinars in the past, but we're doing a webinar this Wednesday, and I already have 30 people signed up for this webinar. And it's basically a pistol webinar, but just like a live feed like this.
Right.
And then I pre-recorded the demonstration component of it in detail with video, where I could integrate it into the video. Yeah. So
Very
we're
cool.
adapting it.
What program are you using?
I'm using Adobe Connect.
Okay. Nice. Very cool. Okay. Next question. Best thing about this lockdown?
I think the best thing about this lockdown is connecting with our roots. I think we've gotten displaced. Technology and just capitalism as a whole has disconnected us from each other. So for the first time, we're actually having to confront each other and have the conversation or have the relationships. And I think that's going to be the best thing when it's all said and done, is our connection with each other. Even though we're socially disconnected from each other, internally with family and friends, it's a good opportunity to take advantage of that time.
Right. And let's just hope that it carries over once this thing is lifted. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
Worst thing about the lockdown?
I think the worst thing is really the economic dysfunction. When you look at, I'm a small business owner, so the SBA, the PPP, all the rollouts of the stimulus and everything else that's trying to relieve the small business woes, it's been a nightmare already, and it's not going to get better. I mean, you can't pump $350 billion into small business with no rules, no stipulations. I think the worst thing that's going to take place is the economic uncertainty.
Right.
It's just going to continue to perpetuate itself the longer this goes on.
Yeah, it's that's the scary thing, because the virus is real, the danger is real, the fear is real, but then this, like the worldwide shutdown, I mean, that's unprecedented. That word's used all the time, of course, that just happened. And then you see so much political power manipulation, and that's the scary part. And then
Yeah.
for most of us, we just went, okay, I'll close my business. Okay, I'm not going to go to work. Okay, I'll fire people. And we're almost like, this is an interesting philosophical conundrum, and what I do, and I know what you do. So we look at stuff as like, why is somebody victimized by a certain situation? A lot of it is you cooperated with the bad guy. We always tell people, if you cooperate with a mugger, you get mugged. You cooperate with a rapist, you get raped. You cooperate with a murderer, you get murdered. And you've got to fight. And all of us, certainly publicly, are like, okay, I'm not going to go to the beach. I'm not going to go to my business. I'm not going to do that. So it's kind of scary, because you have the risk and the danger of the virus. But then if the whole economy collapses around the world, this is going to be purge 3, looting, rioting, suicides, domestic violence. I mean, that's a crazy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the second and third order effects are compounding themselves now, and the effect is not really known, but there will be an adverse effect. In psychology, it's already taking place. I mean, the anxiety, depression, people's issues aren't going to be actioned now, but a month from now, 2 months from now, when people get desperate, when people are trying to survive, and I feel bad for those people, because I'm not in that circumstance, because I have a good nest egg. I've done the appropriate things to diversify, whether it's the company or my even personal financial portfolio. So I'll be okay. But I know there's desperation in some people. But on the same token, in our fields of expertise, there needs to be a means to provide education and content still, to educate people on what the risk factors are, because there will be risk factors.
Sure.
And the time will tell. I mean, ultimately, time will tell.
Hopefully they realize that there are some strategic things they could do, I think, without just shutting down the economy. We can be super, like, the world won't be the same. If this stopped tomorrow, we're not running up to people. It's like, oh, hi, how are you? Go to hug them, and then, wait a minute, it'll be like an elbow or a fist bump, and then we'll wash our hands, and but not to make light of it. It's very, very real. So next question. There's so much information out there, and it changes rapidly. And a lot of it is disinformation. A lot of it is misinformation. A lot of it is like I'm just so happy that the Kennedy Center got their $25 million, because that was really going to help the coronavirus. I'm being facetious there. Anyone listening to me, right? All the bullshit that a particular party tried to slip in and all that, without turning this into a political thing. Where are you getting your information and verifying it so that you can make critical thinking, informed decisions? Because if you spend a half an hour on Twitter looking at some of the political feeds, or go to this network or that network, you almost, and that's where like you sit there and you get numb. That's what the media has turned into, is why most citizens, I think, are just numb, going, I'll just sit here and see if something happens.
Yeah, that's a valid point, and that's happening in real time, and it's really diluting our abilities to get good information. So I'm taking all of my information from the COVID-19 task force that the White House has identified. The reason I am is because between the CDC and the task force that, in this case, President Trump has assimilated, they are all in real time getting data from every single healthcare provider in every state, accumulating the metrics that has designed the model that has been demonstrated during the White House conference briefs of how this is going to go. And so that data, to me, is super important in developing the policy that might predict or might mitigate potential risk. And that is like holistically, I'm taking that approach, but I'm also paying attention to different media circuits, it should be circuses, and seeing what kind of information they're putting out as well, because I want to get an idea from individual states like New York City. Like, I'm listening to Cuomo, for example, more than I would like to, but because he's in the epicenter of what the model could look like US wide, he's just ahead of the curve. I mean, literally ahead of the curve. I'm using that information to kind of design my own opinions and assumptions of what could happen potentially in the future. I think that's the best approach, especially when on the right you have Fox, on the left you have CNN and MSNBC. They're all spinning it to meet their political agendas.
Right. What bothers you the most about what's going on?
I think what bothers me the most is you're always going to have naysayers and you're going to have conspiracy theorists. But what bothers me the most is seemingly intelligent people not realizing how much or how significant this really is. Like, for example, we're approaching 10,000 people in the United States who have been killed. We'll be there pretty soon. So a couple of weeks ago, it was a couple thousand. And then the statistics, the people who are manipulating that statistic, and I mean influencers, I mean actors and actresses and people who are influential, who take that and go, look, it's just like the flu. It's not a big deal. And then I go, is any loss of life a big deal in your world? Because it should be. And I always try to delineate for people, and using this analogy, which is in our wheelhouse, the flu is like a bad guy with an AK-47. Well, if you say that the COVID-19 or the coronavirus is like the flu, then you're just saying it's just like that guy with an AK-47, except the coronavirus is just like another guy with another machine gun. So you have two parallel lines here, and they're two distinct paths. So if you are getting through flu, then you still have the probability of running into the guy with another AK-47.
Right.
So it's just as important to pay attention to one danger as it is two separate dangers.
It's a multiple assailant threat.
Absolutely.
And you might even expand on that on your next talk. And it's interesting because the numbers, a lot of people suggest that the flu numbers are exponentially higher than this. This just happens to be respiratory, and then when you've got a deficit of respirators and overworked hospitals, things can get bad really quickly. But when you were talking about that, I love that metaphor, is that for some people, the coronavirus is you got shot by this virus with their AK, and some people have a vest and some people don't. And they're going to get knocked down and go, thank God I had a vest. That's the healthy person. And you don't know, right? Nobody gets up and goes, I'm probably going to die today. We don't think that way. Yep. But it's an interesting, I love that metaphor. That was nice. That was nice, man. One of the things that I've noticed is like everybody who dies now, and this is like, I didn't verify this. I'm giving air quotes here. I didn't verify this, but you see it in the news. There's a big scandal. I forget what state it was, where some young baby died. It was an accident, and their governor said that's a COVID-19 death. And then it was exposed that it wasn't, where people are just lying about shit to create this fear mongering and to manipulate that herd, psychology of like, just fucking listen to us. We'll take care of things. And, when you've got people like you who goes like, hey, nobody's coming to help you. You're, a maxim that I've been using for years is you're the first responder in your fight. You've got to take care of shit. You're the hostage rescue team. You got to extract yourself. If the cavalry comes along and helps you and you're prepared to do it, all the better. But if nobody comes, what are you doing? Are you sitting there? And so while the numbers are increasing, and I agree with that, what they're not saying, and this is going to sound really callous, folks, but there are people who are dying because of COVID-19 who are in the hospital dying anyhow. They were, right? And so every single death, even if there were like, 100 people where the doctors said like, hey, sorry, can't do it. And then they contract COVID-19. the numbers are being attributed to COVID-19, not to the fact that they were already on their deathbed. And I think that's significant when we're talking about data, we're talking about the numbers.
Yeah, you're that, and that's a valid point. Just like it is, I mean, if you look on the CDC's website for the last seasonal flu outbreak, which was October of 2019 till really March of this year, it actually outlines a spectrum between 10,000 to 57,000. And that broad spectrum is because of exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
Are there underlying health issues? Did the person have something prior to that? They got infected, it caused bacterial pneumonia, they passed away from bacterial pneumonia, but was it tied to the flu? And so then that's why you get that broad spectrum. And you're right, and the data that's announced right now, it's so broad, it's hard to even determine the reporting. When a state reports, they would be more likely to inflate their numbers to get more federal assistance than they would to underreport their numbers, because there's incentives, obviously. And so if you're the governor and you're like giving your direct line communication to each healthcare provider in your state, you would say, hey, listen, if it's even closely related to COVID-19, I don't care what it is or what the circumstances is, if they test positive, no matter what, I want you to report it as that, versus a state that's like New York City. They're just filling morgues full of people. Then you get this discrepancy. I think the most important analytic to understand, well, it's not even an analytic. I think the most important thing to understand is this thing real? The answer is yes.
Yes.
Did it derive in Wuhan, China? The answer is yes. Is it a danger to you and your overall health? Yes, definitely. One of the things that scares me about me being vigilant and not wanting to contract it, one, it derived in China. I don't want anything in my body that derived in China, right? Except for all the clothes that I wear on my body that are made in China, but I don't want anything inside me.
Right.
And in addition to that, right now, one of the things that's scary is even in young people, that's 30s and 40s, there is viral pneumonia, which does a lot of damage to the lungs. And so the long-term effects of what this is doing to your lung capacity or your overall health and well-being isn't very well known. And, that's going to take years to identify. So just for those markers alone, I'm going to even ignore the white noise and a lot of that conversation and just know that I want to take care of me, my family, my close friends. And so I'm going to do everything possible to insulate ourselves to make sure we're better prepared.
Yeah. It was very interesting because I was, one of the people who early on, you hear like doctors coming on going, hey, it's just a bad flu. And if you've got some immune deficiency, if you're much older, but it's a bad flu. And I think and so I remember early on, you guys, Fieldcraft was posting a lot about this. And I was like, wow, like Mike's really pushing this thing, and you turned out to be right. It was like back then it was like, wow, like, are you guys amplifying this for, it was just thoughts in my head. Part of it, if I can be honest, everyone listening, is there's, there's the real stuff and there's the imagined stuff. And all the study I've done on fear management, the psychology of fear, is the stimuli we get from the outside world creates the movie we run in our mind. And in this movie metaphor, I tell people like this is that acronym I use, false expectations appearing real, where someone says something and then you start thinking about it. And next thing you know, you've been sitting there for half an hour, and everyone's dead and you're dying and you're on the run, and you've created this nightmare fucking horror movie where you're victim number one instead of the hero, the action star who figures it out. And we all need to catch ourselves when we start hallucinating this fucking horror movie, create that self-awareness that creates the critical thinking, so that we go, wait a minute, fucking stop that movie. In my mind, I'm in the fear loop here, and I should be, because the danger is real. But what am I going to do with my fear now? My fear just inspired me to do some research or to get tactical. So very, very interesting. I think so my next question leads into, and you almost just said it, but we can wrap it with a bow, because my next question, which is really interesting, without it being political, if I put you in charge, what would you do next? Right. And the reason I said you sort of were leading into that is your answer was so lucid. I would add, if I were on your team, I'd go, let's tell them 1,000 people died yesterday, but let's tell them they were all 95. And let's tell them that they were all in the hospital and they weren't leaving the hospital. But let's also add what you said. You don't want viral pneumonia. You need to breathe. If you stop breathing, you fucking die. So you don't want to compromise lung capacity and aerobic capacity as an athlete or a human. So, but I feel like the media should tell us both, because one says, let's prepare and respect, what the CDC is telling us. And then one is actually psychologically making sense of the numbers,
Yeah.
But if I put you in charge, I said, hey, President Trump has asked you to, run the country for the next little bit. What would you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, when I first started talking about this, that was very strategic. We wanted to get ahead of it, because we thought, what's the worst case scenario for us? Well, people just are maybe more vigilant and more prepared, but then they're like, well, you got me all riled up for nothing. And for me, that wasn't a big compromise. I mean, so for me, it was easy to talk about it in depth. And we had a whole bunch of scientists. I had a first responder psychologist that was talking to me in Washington State, this is where it started, really. It started near Seattle, in a small county outside of Seattle. And so I wanted to ensure that we were talking about it in depth. As this thing's developed, I think, one, we can't continue to do what we're doing without destroying and adversely affecting our society and economy. And we're almost to that point. I mean, 30 days out, we're almost to that point. The biggest thing that I've seen, the biggest news I've seen on this, is the fact that the FDA last week approved, in a short timeline, a very rapid timeline, the approval of a 15-minute evaluation and test of COVID-19. So they could swab you, they could put it inside of a computer, it can analyze you and tell you in 15 minutes if you have it or not. I think what we need to get I would even be willing to do it in small epicenters. We have to be very good at partitioning our society. And it's like, I take this from the counter-terrorism world, which is cleansing. We call it cleaning, where we develop wash stations where we're partitioning crows versus parrots. And this is all counterterrorism terminology, but basically bad guys from good guys, or potentially people who are good or bad if they're unknown, right? So if we have a means to test everybody in a 15-minute window and controlling somewhat their patterns of life, meaning, hey, we want you to shelter in place, meaning we don't want you to travel beyond the borders of this city and town. If I could start testing people and identifying if they're positive or negative, then I could put the negative people to work, the positive people who recovered to work, and then start establishing in a hot wash who is healthy versus who's not healthy. Right. And then I would better protect and quarantine the highest likelihood of mortality, and keep them away from the populace, the main populace. Right. Well, I think the story that's not being told in New York is the reason that the rates are so high in mortality is because of the obesity rate. Mm-hmm. Because in China, it was the 65-year older male who smoked, which most of China smokes. But in this context in New York City, if you look at just the body composition of those who have passed away, most of them are obese. So that is a high risk factor, but nobody really wants to say it because they don't want to say, hey, if you're fat, you run the chance potentially being a higher marker.
Body shaming and COVID-19.
Exactly.
In a seriously overweight person, you hear them climb up 4 steps and they're like, it's yes. And you have the AK-47 bullet in your metaphor is an attack to the respiratory system.
Yes.
That's the headshot there. I love that answer, man. That was good. 2 more questions. Now this is Like you're Mike Glover, you're a celebrity in our community. You're smart, you're tactical, you're researched. So now, and this is impossible, but detach for it. What is the most challenging thing for you personally through this? Because we have our forward facing, like I've got a whole team. I've got a couple hundred affiliates. I've got my mobile training team. I've got my family. They don't want to see me. You remember Dumb and Dumber with Jim Carrey? Like they don't want to see me in the bathroom with my thumb in my mouth going, mommy, mommy, mommy. Right. And so, you know, when people say, how are you doing? I can go, I don't know, man. Or I can say, fucking things are good, man. What do you know, and so for you personally, what's been the most challenging thing for you?
It's trying to be a voice of reason on the right side of preparedness, while also trying to balance my own family life. Because I don't want to compromise. Like I'm out there, like I even said, hey, I told the guys, I'm like, I want to go to New York. I want to interview doctors and nurses, and I want to talk to people who are on the ground because I want some ground truth in this. I don't want to see it all through the media lens. And guys are like, oh, if you get corona, you're quarantined for 14 days. If you're quarantined for 14 days, you're just going to do a whole bunch of live feeds, and maybe that's advantageous, but you're potentially compromising the health of the entire system here.
Right.
And so I want to be that voice, but I also want to also protect my family and my circumstance. Like there's a reason why I don't always document in preparedness my setup. Like I don't want to show people my basement and my off-grid location of everything that I have stockpiled and the way that I do things, because I'm compromising my own security. Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's finding that balance there.
Yeah. That reminds me, it just popped in my head when Schwarzkopf was running stuff and some fucking reporter, you know, said, asked him, you know, when the surprise attack was going to happen. You know, I don't really remember that. It was like, it became a legendary. So when is the assault going to happen? Well, we're trying to keep that a surprise. Thank you. Next question. It was classic. It was classic. Here's where I hide my shit, guys. Okay. So last question, man, this has been great. I've always been impressed with how lucid you are. And because there's a lot of guys, you know, in the gun community, in the fighting community, that you know, they're almost a persona of what you want, like the movie action hero stuff, and that's just not the way it is. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your insights. Final message for people listening specific to this scenario.
So the final message would be specific to some data and science that's really important to understand. And just real quickly, there's something called the R0 factor. It has to do with ratios and the way things are transmitted, especially infectious disease. And the R0 factor for the standard flu is a 1-to-1 ratio. It's damn near 1-to-1. It's 1 to 1.2, meaning if I am contagious, I am potentially going to infect another person with the common flu. During the Spanish influenza of 1918 to 1919, that R0 factor was about 1.8. So let's just call it 2 people. So for every 1 person, they infected 2 people. The R0 factor for coronavirus as it sits today is anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5. So that means that it's around 3 people. So for every 1 person who's contagious is going to infect 3 people. Part of that reason is because you're asymptomatic, meaning no symptoms for up to 14 days. So even if you're healthy, even if you have your wits about you, you're smart, and you get infected, you are potentially infecting everybody in your clan and your tribe and your family, all your friends. And that, with anybody who's compromised immunity-wise, could be detrimental to their health. So again, what I would say is follow the mitigation protocol, which is just limiting your exposure to human beings. This type of exposure is absolutely warranted, and this is what we should be doing. But overall exposure to people should be minimized in order to save other people. I'm not doing this for me because I know I'm good. I'm doing this for grandma. I'm doing this for somebody's obese father. And this is a national American mindset that we should have together to be on the same sheet of music, not necessarily worrying about ourselves in this time. Tony, I want to say, man, if I would have thought 10 years ago, even being in special operations at the prime of my career, that I'd be doing a podcast with Tony Blauer 10 years from now talking about preparedness, I would have slapped you in the face and called you a liar. Because even 10 years ago, I was allured, I still am, and just completely immersed in fantasized about your tactics and your mindset and implementing that in my life. And the fact that I'm here with you on this conversation is just a distinct honor of mine. And I appreciate everything that you do for guys like me, but also for normal people who need to figure shit out, especially in bad circumstances. And I appreciate it, Tony.
Dude, man, thank you so much. I mean, I live for this. I abhor violence, which is why I've studied it. And my biggest honor was always, stepping onto some post or some base or some police department and just pouring my heart out. And it was always about the mindset and the attitude. It wasn't about the mechanics or the technique. And I really appreciate you saying that. And, with someone from your background to say that, even now, I'm turning 60 in May. I get goosebumps hearing that. I've been doing this for 40 years, and just to hear that, I that means a lot to me. Thank you. Dude, this was great. This was amazing. I'm gonna, these are so short that I'm gonna pop them up probably today sometime and get it out there, because I'm interviewing different people who've impressed me online, and trying to, this is my way of getting, like, instead of CNN and Fox, I'm like, hey, listen to this guy, share it, because this is really good information. And thank you, and stay safe, man. And I can't wait to, when this is done, we definitely got to get together. I'll come visit you, and we'll shoot the shit and shoot.
It'd be an honor, Tony. Thank you so much, man.
Okay, be safe, Mike.
You too.